Hello, everyone, and welcome to Passion Talk, an initiative by Times Passion Trails. It is an exclusively curated series of masterclasses where experts talk about their art, the inspiration, the stories, and their passion behind it. You have seen how our experts have specially crafted the subject for their masterclasses, sharing unique pearls of wisdom only they bring to the world. Get ready to discover flavors of traditional cuisines and their origins, understand the art of mixology, get to know how cooking is nothing short of creating a sensory masterpiece, or letting people live the moment through your photographs is storytelling like no other. Lockdown has shown us all, in order to stay in and stay sane, you need a passion. Get ready to be inspired. Our guest today is ace photographer Nick Fleming. Nick Fleming's photographs do not capture moments, they set them free and enable the other to live them. Aware of the complexities that underlie the process of subject photographing subject, his photos emanate a profound sense of beauty and honesty. While based in Italy, he has worked on news features and picture stories, book covers and private commissions. His solo exhibitions include the Kumbh Mela personal pilgrimages, the making of British Gurkha soldier, and living divinely among others. He has also lectured at the Royal Geographical Society, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and taught and lectured at Art in Action. Welcome to Passion Talk, Nick.
Thank you very much, Amin, and thank you for inviting me onto these Passion Talks by the Times of India Passion Trails. It's a privilege to be here, and hopefully I can talk about my passion and instill in other people in these times of difficulty and limitations, as it were, to try and expand people's minds in these unprecedented times, shall we say.
Absolutely. Nick, to begin with, how did photography become passion? Take us through that journey.
It certainly wasn't my first career, but it was something has always been sort of with me in the back of my mind as something which has really interested me. My father was a keen photographer, and I think probably a little bit of that rubbed off on me. And eventually, one has to decide in life. You come to a crossroads, as it were. You either do it or you don't. And I came to that particular crossroads probably about 11, 12 years into my first career, and decided there and then, after coming back from India, as it happens, and something, there was an event and an occurrence, an interesting thing which happened to me there, which sort of, in the end, forced me to make my mind up, and I decided to take the plunge. So that was way back in about 1995, 96. But it precipitated by a trip to India. And I met someone particular that I was interested in, and I wanted to pursue it further. But I've always been interested in pictures, in stories, in news, current affairs, newspaper and magazines, and that sort of thing. So I then and there decided to take what we called a sabbatical back then, and I did a postgraduate photojournalism course in London, and at the end of that, I had to make the decision of whether to cut my ties with my previous work and pursue my passion for photography in a more serious professional way, and become a photojournalist, and that's exactly what I did. So we're talking sort of 24, 25 years ago.
Okay. 25 years ago, you said, sorry to interrupt you on your story, but you said that there was a moment that inspired you to take up photography as a passion in India.
Yeah.
Tell us about that moment, please.
Well, a few previous years before that, I had been on holiday in India, and I enjoyed that experience very much. And as I said, I was thinking about how I could combine a new career with travel and meeting new people and having new experiences, etc. Having a camera in your hand is the perfect way to do that. So as I say, I embarked on this photojournalism career and then decided to do a story in India. But before that, just to answer your question, the final decision to make up my mind to do this was, I was in northern India at the time, and I met a fellow colleague, a fellow photographer who was working there at the time, and he just happened to have a small portfolio of photos with him, which he showed me. We discussed photography and how he goes about his working practices, etc. And that really sort of cemented my wish, my desire to take it further, basically. So it was an encounter in rural India which cemented my desire, as I said, to take up photography on a more serious professional basis, and I've done it ever since sort of 1996, 97, really. And that's basically it, really.
So it's been 25 years.
It has. It's gone incredibly quickly. So, I mean, if anyone out there listening to this is thinking about, they're passionate about photography, it's something they really want to pursue on a more serious level, then I suggest that they do that straight away, because time goes very, very quickly in life, and photography is a time-consuming, all-consuming way of life. And believe you me, when I'm involved in doing work and doing projects, time goes very, very quickly. I assure you of that. So it doesn't feel like 25 years, I can assure you. And much of that time has been spent in India doing various work and personal projects.
True. I mean, rightly pointed out, time does not wait. And that's that is exactly the idea behind these passion talks, to get to understand from you, from really passionate people like you, that what's the real time to turn your hobby into your passion? Like, what's the time to go for it?
There's got to be an input. There's got to be an impetus. There's got to be a very, very strong desire to do this. If we're talking photography now, you have to really want to do it, because it's not always a glamorous way of life, and at times can be hard. But you need, in order to get through the difficult times, you need to believe in what you do, really want to do what you do, and want to pursue it to the logical conclusions. Always developing, always doing fulfilling work, and doing something you're really serious and concerned about. Because if you're not interested, really committed and interested in what you do, then you cannot possibly get other people to be interested or committed in what you do. So the work you do will absolutely reflect how your resulting photography will develop. If you want to produce engaging, impactful, elegant photos, you have to interact and be that person. And as I say, if you really want to do it, you have to engage in work. In my experience, which means something to you. You have to really believe in the work you want to engage in, and that has sustained me, through these 25 years, if you like. And once you start, it's making your mind up, and it's starting this. It sounds like a big step to take, but once you've taken that step, that is the difficult bit. Once you've taken that step, it's things begin to
Okay.
open up to you, and things happen, and things fall into place which you totally didn't expect to do, or expect to happen. So you have to make the first step,
Okay.
though.
And having made the first step is when the things really get difficult. That's when the real
Well,
test of passion starts.
kind of, yes. I mean, that's when you really have to fall back on your desire and your commitment. And you think, well, okay, I've done it, so what happens now? And then you really have to focus your mind on how you're going to do it, what you really are committed, what you really are interested in, and then go for it. But it's having the energy and
Okay.
drive to do that is the important thing in my experience. Because photography is it's a solo
Okay.
profession. It can be quite lonely at times, and you need to be a disciplined sort of person, a person who is self-committed,
Yeah.
self-initiating stories and projects, and you have to be interested in what's going on in the world, not only in the world, but around you as a person, your locality. Do a lot of reading, do a lot of research, and really pursue, as I keep saying, pursue what you're interested in, and things will start to open up for you, and you can make some good work, and actually lay some serious foundations with what started out for me just an interest, if not more than an interest, a passion, but it turned out into a whole way of life.
Okay. And take us through that journey, Nick. 25 years ago, what was your work, and today, what would be the latest work? How Nick's work has evolved, and also Nick as a photographer has evolved.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just give you an example. How I said, once you make that commitment, then things start to fall into place, unexpected things. And as you sort of alluded to in your question, that once you make that step, then what happens now? It's like a blank canvas. But have a focused, mindful set of goals, if you like, and make it your goal to start one of those. And okay, so I had this idea way back in 1997 to go to Old Delhi and photograph a very interesting character who I'd read about in London called Guru Hanuman, who was a wrestler, and he was in his, if not in his late 80s, in his early 90s at that point. You may have heard of him or whatever. And he was a big character in the wrestling circles in certainly Delhi, certainly northern India, and certainly India as a whole. And he was a great character, big man, even at a ripe old age. He was in fine health, and I spent a lot of time at his akhada in Old Delhi, taking photos of his wrestling students. And one day I was sitting there, and I was about to get up and leave for the day when a Hindu guru turned up and invited Guru Hanuman to the Kumbh Mela, which was happening at that time in Hardwar. So I think it was 97, 98, the Kumbh Mela in Hardwar. So he invited Guru Hanuman to come and see him in his tent up in Hardwar, where he was staying. The Guru was staying during the Kumbh. So I sort of got an impression that Guru Hanuman thought this was a good idea. And so anyway, I left for the day, and I arranged to come back a couple of days later. So I did my usual thing, came back later, and then he suddenly told me that particular night they were going to drive to Hardwar. So at the end of the evening, after some food in the Yakara, and I say we, that was Guru Hanuman and then about 5 of his wrestling students and me. So there was about 6 or 7 of us.
Okay.
And this was my totally first experience of Kumbh. And we drove into Hardwar, and I just couldn't believe the crowds, the atmosphere, and dawn was just breaking in Hardwar when we arrived. And it took us a bit of time to find the Guru. We found the Guru and went to his tent, and Guru Hanuman spent some time with him. And then Guru Hanuman went to bathe in the Ganges, and it was a great day, great photographically as well. But it was from there that my interest in the Kumbh was sparked. And although I only spent a day at the Kumbh in Hardwar, I decided there and then I must come back, and I will come back to the next Kumbh, which I did, which was in Allahabad in 2001. And from then on, I've been to 5 Kumbhs or whatever. And so I've been to every location of the Kumbh in India, and I've done a lot of work with sadhus and yogis in the Kumbh, and spent a lot of time trying to understand what goes on there. And so the point of the story is that you start something and then something unexpected.
And your series of one of your solo exhibitions was the Kumbh Mela personal pilgrimages that was inspired by these visits.
What can transpire once you make a commitment to something, another door opens, if you like. So open one door and then 2 or 3 other doors open as well into different spaces and different rooms. And that's actually what's happened throughout my photographic career. It keeps happening. It's quite extraordinary. It's uncanny that I'm beginning to come up. I'm coming up at a rather barren, non-productive, non-creative time when I go out and do something, and then an idea develops, and then I start again, as it were. So it's been a reconfirmation over the years of not only my working practice, my passion, and how stories and projects develop over the years.
Okay, and then what took you to tell us a bit about the making of British Gurkha Soldier, that series of work from Kumbh to making a British Gurkha Soldier. Tell us a bit about that journey.
Yeah, the Kumbh project is still ongoing. If the current pandemic allows us, I will hopefully travel to Hardwar. I think it's next year. Maybe it'll take place, and that'll be like the full circle back to Hardwar all those years later. But I've always been interested in things military, and over the years I've come across British Gurkhas. The connection with Britain and Nepal is strong. It goes back many years, and it was a project I wanted to do. So I did some work with the Ministry of Defence in UK, and ended up doing it was over a year of work on British Gurkha soldiers, how they're recruited, how they're trained in the UK, how they're recruited in Nepal, how they're brought back to the UK, where they're trained in Yorkshire in the UK, and how they're then each year, I think just over 200 Gurkhas are recruited. Something like 25,000 Nepali boys in the age range of 17 and a half and 21 try and be recruited. So it's very, very, very stiff competition to get into the British Gurkha army, become a British Gurkha soldier. And then I spent a bit of time in ex-Yugoslavia, where they were doing peacekeeping role, and I went to Brunei, where they're based as well, and did some work in the jungle and on exercise there, and it became again an all-consuming photographic project, which again was incredibly interesting, and it taught me a lot about. It developed my interest in Nepal and how Nepali people view the UK and that sort of symbiotic relationship, as it were, with Britain and etc. So again, it was an interesting thing, but it didn't really. I mean, it was a long project, and it was a project I became all-consuming, but it didn't have. It was similar to the Kum in terms of how I approached it, but it didn't have any physical connection, as it were. But it's that sort of project, that long-term project, which I can really get into, spend time with. And for me, photography is not only just about putting your camera to your eye and taking the picture. That's the easy bit. The difficult bit is to get into situations which you're comfortable in, and people are comfortable with you, and be patient and allow things to develop in front of you, and then you start to see magical things happening in front of you, and you can start to take meaningful pictures. It takes time. Patience, persistence, timing, and luck is the way I look at photography.
Patience, persistence, timing, and luck.
Yes.
Very important that those who are picking up this passion follow these 4 principles. Very interesting thing, Nick, about you is the process of. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say I have 4. The way I want to, the final image I'm looking for, there is a sort of 4 main ingredients, if I can just mention that so people know what I'm talking about. In my images, I'm looking for 4 things. I'm looking for simplicity, because I think it has to be simple. It has to be easily interpreted, without lots of not too much details. It has to be simple. Simple in its interpretation, simple in its process. It has to be meaningful, and when I say meaningful, there has to be some perspective and depth in there, as well as the content. The story has to have meaning for me, not only to the viewer, but to what is going on inside the frame of the picture. So there has to be balance between the background and the foreground and the midground. So it has to have meaning, and I believe it has to be elegantly composed somehow. The way the elements within the picture, the people in the picture, if you like, the subjects in the picture are interacting, how they are arranged in the frame. And for me, photography has to be true to life. I'm not in the game of stage managing or using artifice, or I don't use Photoshop. So what I see in front of me, I try and convey in the truest possible way, with integrity and honesty. So those are the 4 things that I'm looking for in an image, really. So the way I approach photography is I have a clear vision of what I want to do. So every time I go out into the field, and before I take a picture, I ask myself 2 questions. The first question is, what do I want to say? What am I trying to say in the picture? How am I trying to interpret what is going in front of me? So it's the communication. What am I trying to say? That's my first question. The second question is, how do I want to say it? So what do I want to include or take out of the final image, so the viewer can interpret what's going on, what I saw basically, and what I'm trying to convey. So it's those 2 things. What am I trying to say, and how do I want to say it? I reiterate that to myself every time I go out and take a picture. And I think it's a good way for me, it works for me, to
All right. And
just refocus, be conscious of what I'm doing. I'm not one of these photographers who can just walk out the front door and wander down the street and hope to fall upon the most magical scene to develop in front of me. I can't do that. I have to have a purpose, a vision of what I'm trying to do. My photos start in my mind's eye, if you like. I have a rough idea of what I want to, the final image of what I'm looking for, and I work around that every time I go out there. And it gives me a sort of a starting point. So, yeah, that's what I do. I always have to be, I always tell people to be conscious, don't be mindless, be focused, and work flat out for short periods of time. Be very, very, very focused on what you're doing. And that's how I work. Because photography can be hard work, believe me.
yes, it can be. I mean, it can be lonely as well, as you said.
It's a very
There's
solo.
a lot of times when it's just you and your
It's
camera.
just me, and that's the way I like it, really. So, again, if you have a problem being on your own and having problem disciplining yourself or motivating yourself, then you really have to iron out that particular issue if you want to make it as a photographer. And very often people come to me and ask me during my workshops or whatever, and they have a particular problem with something. Their photography is not working, or they can't do this, and they feel it's difficult to do that. And very often, in fact, more often than not, it's nothing to do with the photography. It's to do with their own personal issue or personal development or lack of it. And I think it's very important to, if you're serious, do you understand what I'm saying? It's often not a photography
absolutely
hurdle to overcome or handicap. It's a personal issue. And I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
A lot of questions I get asked is, I want to take pictures of people, but every time I take the camera to my eye and have a look, people stop doing what they're doing, and basically they're shy in front of people. They can't seem to be comfortable around people. And if you want to take serious photos of people, you have to be able to interact with people, get on with people, be comfortable with people, be comfortable in other people's presence, and know how to talk to people, to give them space and them to give you space to be able to work around them. And that is often an issue that needs to be addressed before you can actually take your photography further in terms of improvement. Very often, all it is that people are reluctant to get involved or be close to people. People through whatever issue it is. And once people overcome that issue, and all I tell them is, what's the worst that's going to happen to them if they ask someone if they can take their picture? The worst thing that's going to happen to them is that someone is going to say no. So, that's not too bad, is it? And more often than not, 90% of the time, people are going to be quite happy to have their photo taken. And once people get over that issue, then a whole new world opens up to them. And so I encourage people to think about their own personal, the way they conduct themselves, how they interact with the world, how they see the world. Because how people see the world is going to reflect directly in the pictures they take. You cannot separate the two. You cannot be one person and a photographer. The two merge. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? You cannot divorce one with the other. You are the photographer and the person are the same thing. So if you are one type of person, you're going to be it's going to reflect in the pictures you take. How you see the world is how you're going to be as a photographer, and vice versa. How you are a photographer is going to be how you see the world and how you communicate that vision through pictures to your viewer. There's no way of separating the two. So if you're not happy with the way you are, then change it, or be conscious of your shortcomings and then address them, and then your photography will improve. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And very often people make the mistake of thinking it's a photography problem.
Absolutely.
And
very, very rightly said.
It's a personal issue. I tell people...
You've really raised pretty valid points that you cannot separate yourself from your work. You
absolutely.
Can't be two different personalities at work.
Cannot.
You really need to bring your best game. You really need to be passionately involved. You really need to feel what you're doing when you're there at work.
Absolutely. Photography, in fact, all walks of life, you've got to be honest. You've got to have integrity, because for how long can you put up a pretense? In the end, it's going to come crashing down, and it's not going to work for you. Now, let's go back to the Kumbh Mela, for instance. It's a very good laboratory, if you like. I've observed photographers at work there, and it's been a very interesting learning experience, should we put it like that. But one thing I do see all the time are people who go around in groups, like photographers who go around in groups, and because they're slightly fearful and scared of approaching people, and so they get strength from numbers, if you like, and they sort of operate around the fringes of what's going on in front of them, the action, if you like, instead of engaging full on with your subject. They are flitting around the edges with a long lens, trying to take pictures candidly. And for me, that doesn't work, because you're missing, there's that barrier there all the time although you can get a picture of someone who not knowing they're being photographed, but for me, that's not what the point of photography is all about. You're not going to get that connection, that personal connection, which you have to have in your pictures, as far as I'm concerned. So, if you like, later on in the talk or before the end, we talk about, what lenses just to make sure you use, and how you're going to get. If you're a person who finds it difficult to interact with people, how are you going to force yourself to get closer to people and change the way you photograph is what I'm in the business of. And I try to tell at my workshops, try to tell the students or whatever, potential photographers, how to go about actually developing the way you take pictures. Because unless you're developing, and you're never going to fulfill the full potential of what you can achieve with a camera in your hand, basically. And one needs to be aware of that.
Okay. And Nick, do tell us about this interesting thought process of yours, which is the subject photographing the subject.
How do you mean? How do I go about photographing? You mean my particular personal practice, or is that what you're alluding to? Or
yep, the personal practice and this thought process, subject photographing subject, that you yourself actually you think of the photographer as a subject as well, and that subject is photographing the subject in front of the lens. So tell us about these two subjects, one behind the camera, one in front of the camera, and how do you approach this situation?
Well, it's a question of you have to start with your whole demeanor. Now, I'll sort of go through the way I approach my work is time. You've got to give yourself plenty of time. Don't be in a rush. I'm always one for quality rather than quantity. I can't understand photographers who come into a situation and take thousands of images just like that. Again, I've seen it many, many times. Photographers just blasting away with a camera And there's no thought that goes into it. There's no plan. There's no inspiration there. I think you cannot avoid, if I'm photographing people, I like to try to understand what their lifestyle is about, what are they doing in front of you, a little bit about them. I try and like the people I photograph. I don't photograph people I can't communicate with or connect with. So there has to be that connection for me in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a curiosity there. There has to be an interest. Mm-hmm. There has to be a desire for me to find out more about the person I'm photographing. Now, the process is two-way. The person, mm-hmm. I'm very conscious of the person I'm mm-hmm. photographing has to be comfortable with me mm-hmm. there, because let's face it, it's quite intrusive. Mm-hmm. I'm there. Just okay. For example, I'm sitting in a sadhu's tent at the Kumbh Mela, and he's there in his own personal space, and there's this foreigner sitting in front mm-hmm. of him with a camera, and mm-hmm. he doesn't know that much about me, and I want to photograph, and I want him to be comfortable, and I want him to really, what I'm looking for is for him to forget about the fact that I'm there with a camera in my hand, so he can carry on as natural as he possibly can, and photograph okay. him in his own environment, doing what he would be mm-hmm. doing if I wasn't there, is ultimately what I'm looking for. And that does take time. It takes time, it takes patience, and often one has to keep going back to the same subject for them to get to know you and for you to get to know them. So again, going back to the Kumbh, I first met mm-hmm. sadhus in 2001, and who I still interact with, see from time to time when I'm back in India, and I see them develop and they see me, and so we get to know each mm-hmm. other. So the taking of the pictures becomes easier and easier mm-hmm. as the longer time I spend with these people. And so it's building up okay. up a relationship with the people I photograph. Now, if that takes days or weeks or years okay. or just minutes, the same process is still the same process in theory. You know, I still go through the same things. You know, have a cup of tea with somebody. Just spend a little bit of time before getting your camera out, mm-hmm. getting to know somebody, talking to them, asking them, you know, what they're doing. Be interested in other people and what they do. One has to be if one's a people's photographer. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what I do. That's what takes the time. Okay. That's how I practice. And being conscious of what will visually work and what visually won't work. But I'm not in the business of stage managing, getting people mm-hmm. to do something they don't want to do. I'm always very conscious of people being comfortable in what they do, mm-hmm. and I prefer to work around other people.
Nick, do you think of the frame before you step out? Do you think of the final image before you step out? Do you have like a visual in mind that eventually this is what you're going to be clicking, or it's at the moment that you realize that this looks good in the frame?
A little bit of both. I have, as I said earlier, I have a vision in mind of what I want to do. Okay. Maybe even if it's as vague as the story or the subject matter, but the final image, I have mm-hmm. a little bit of an idea what I want, but photography always surprises me, and I more often than not come away with an image that I mm-hmm. didn't expect to produce. I often think that mm-hmm. one doesn't need I don't want to be too rigid in the potential final image that I want. Leave that element of flexibility there. Mm-hmm. So, as I say, just to answer your question, is I have an idea of what I want to do. I have a vision in my mind's eye, of what sort of picture I want, what sort of thing I want to convey, but the final image, all the elements in that image very often surprise me in their content at the end. And sometimes I'll go through a whole series of pictures and think, come away from the picture shoot, if you like, and thinking, I don't think I got what I wanted. I go back over the series of photos and think, now that picture I didn't expect to get, but it actually sums up what I was trying to do. So it works both ways. But the important thing is to get into the situation which you envisaged in the first place, and then let things transpire from there. Let things happen around you. Give yourself the opportunity to be flexible, be adaptable, and sort of kind of change and go, because nothing ever happens totally in the plan. There's always some element that happens that's a surprise or an unexpected element. That's the beauty, magic of photography.
Okay. And Nick, what's been the most common question that aspiring photographers have asked you, and what's one constant advice you've given them?
Sort of two categories to the question. Firstly, people very often ask me about what camera I use and what photography equipment I use, which I kind of answer that it's not really relevant, frankly. For me, a camera is just a device that I use to create an image. It doesn't really matter what camera I use. However, lenses do matter, and I always advise aspiring photographers to buy the best lens they can afford at the time, because it's the lens that really is the important element to the camera gear, if you like. It's the lens, not necessarily the camera. I always tell people to buy a simple camera and to use the manual in manual mode. Don't put it on automatic and click away without thinking about what you're doing. So, but I kind of take it for read that people understand light and how to harness light and how to manage light within the camera and within the image. But that can be a common question is, how do I do exposures and what have you? And I always tell people to, the scene that they're photographing, the scene in front of them, they need to expose, in terms of light anyway, need to expose for the brightest part of the scene. So if it's sunlight shining on one part of the scene and it's shadow in the rest, then compose and to register and measure the light in the brightest part of that particular frame. But again, although photography is all about light, it's something that needs to come to the photographer naturally, and it's a question of practice and understanding how the light is falling in your scene and the best times of day to go out and harness the best light during the day. So there's that part. There's also, just going back to what we were talking about earlier, is the people problem people have. The most common, I think, problem that people have is approaching the subject matter, the person they want to photograph. They have difficulty actually breaking the ice and actually talking to people, whether it be
the moment people see the camera,
street photographers, documentary photographers, portrait photographers, aspiring photographers, they seem to have, it's a very common problem, is that people initially have a difficulty in approaching, just talking to people. And I just tell people, what's the worst that can happen to you? And they never thought about it like that, really. And the worst that can happen to you or me or whatever is, I ask someone if I can take their picture and they say no. So you say, fine, thanks very much, and walk on. And it's not the end of the world, is it? And then the next time you go into something, someone will say, yes, of course. But what I'm saying also is, if someone says no, but you have the opportunity to go back to that person at a later date and ask again, or turn up without your camera and be interested in what they're doing. And there must be a reason for somebody to ask someone initially why they want to take your picture. There must be a reason for it. Either he looks or she looks visually interesting, or he's doing or she's doing something visually interesting. And if they are, then put your camera away and talk to the person, try and understand what they're doing, and break down barriers, make communication that much easier by talking to people, being interested in what's going on around you, being interested in other people's lives. And you'll be surprised how people's initial guard falls down. People often start by being very suspicious about what this person's lurking around with a camera. But if you put your camera away and the only agenda you have is to try and find out a little bit about the person you want to photograph, then again, doors open, things become a little bit more familiar both ways. And I tell people just to spend a bit of time. Don't rush into anything. And if someone initially says no, then, there are other ways of doing it. And as I say, put your camera away, spend a bit of time, ask a few questions, go and see somebody else who does the same thing, or get his friend or her friend or an acquaintance of the person you want to photograph to approach it that way. There's a number of ways you can do it. But if you're just walking down the street and you see somebody you want to photograph.
There are a number of ways, and you've been doing it over the years. It's actually remarkable, Nick, for the incredible journey you've had, 25 years photographing people across the world and really interesting topics and subjects. Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for this masterclass and this session where you've literally taken us through the art of photography, the mind of photographer, and what all goes into clicking that. You don't like to use that word of capturing the perfect moment, but still bringing to life a moment that people can live later on as well. Thank you so much, Nick, for talking to us. For all those who are watching, our series continues with many such amazing masterclasses lined up, with each having as exciting and interesting a personality as Nick. Join in and live your passion. Thank you, Nick, and see you, everyone.